The rain had been falling since dawn, washing the streets of the city in a cold, silver haze. The sky hung heavy and low, like it was holding its breath. Somewhere, hidden behind those clouds, the sun still existed, but down here, among the slick asphalt and flickering neon signs, there was no trace of it. It was the kind of day where the city seemed to swallow its own noise. On the corner of Westbrook Avenue and Pine Street, a coffee shop glowed faintly through fogged-up windows. Inside, 23-year-old Emily Carter sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup that had long since gone cold. She wasn't here for the coffee, she had barely touched it. She was waiting. Emily had been restless all week. Her phone buzzed on the table every few minutes, lighting up with messages she didn't open. She kept glancing toward the door, scanning every stranger who walked in, hoping to see a familiar face. Her friend, Rachel Moore, was late. Rachel was never late. The plan was simple. They'd meet here at noon, catch up over coffee, then head across town to a street market Rachel had been dying to show her. But now, 30 minutes had passed. Emily's unease grew with each tick of the clock. She pulled her coat tighter, glancing at her phone again. One new message, a known number. She hesitated, then tapped it open. "Don't look for her." That was all it said. Emily froze. Her first thought was that it had to be a joke, some wrong number. But the longer she stared at those words, the more they seemed to burn into her mind. She looked around the cafe, heart pounding. Everyone else seemed to be going about their day typing on laptops, talking over pastries, scrolling through their own screens. No one was watching her, or at least, no one she could see. Emily's fingers trembled as she dialed Rachel's number, straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. The air felt heavier now, the windows fogging more as the rain pounded harder outside. She thought about calling the police, but what would she even say? "My friend is 30 minutes late for coffee, and I got a creepy text." They'd think she was overreacting. Then her phone buzzed again. Last warning. Go home. This time, Emily's stomach twisted with something colder than fear. She stood up, shoving the untouched coffee away, and stepped outside. The street seemed quieter than before, though cars hissed past on the wet road. She scanned both directions, unsure where to go. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last moment her life would feel remotely normal, because Rachel Moore had vanished without a trace, and Emily Carter was about to be pulled into a mystery far darker than she could imagine, one where every step she took would bring her closer to the truth, and closer to danger. The rain had picked up, hammering the windshield in a relentless rhythm. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale under the faint glow of the dashboard. In the passenger seat, the stranger sat unnervingly still, his wet jacket clinging to his frame, his eyes fixed forward as if following something only he could see. For the first few miles, neither of them spoke. The hum of the tires and the whisper of the wipers filled the silence. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that every second spent with this man was a second closer to something irreversible. Finally, the stranger spoke. "You're heading north, right?" His voice was low, but there was something sharp in it, like a hidden blade. Daniel nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Yeah, Alaska." The stranger gave a slow, knowing smile. "That's a long way to be driving alone." It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. As if he knew Daniel wasn't entirely alone anymore, and the fact thrilled him. Past a gas station, the neon sign flickering in the rain. Daniel considered pulling in, making an excuse to end the ride early. But before he could, the stranger's hand rested lightly on the dashboard. "Don't stop here," he murmured, too many people. Daniel's pulse spiked. He hadn't said anything about stopping. 10 more miles. The road narrowed, weaving through dense forest. Shadows danced on the wet asphalt, and every curve felt like it was closing in on them. Then, without warning, the stranger leaned back, stretching his arms, his jacket sliding just enough for Daniel to glimpse something in the inner pocket. A black handle, the kind you'd only see on a knife, meant for one thing. Daniel swallowed hard. He kept driving. The stranger noticed his glance and smiled again. This time, it was slower, more deliberate. "You seem nervous." Daniel tried to steady his voice. "Just tired." "Good," the stranger said, turning his gaze back to the road ahead. "You'll sleep better once we're there." There. Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. He didn't ask what that meant. He didn't want to know. Up ahead, the forest opened to a narrow bridge spanning a roaring, rain-swollen river. The stranger shifted in his seat, looking out at the water. "Do you swim?" he asked suddenly. Daniel's chest tightened. "Not really." "Shame," the man said quietly, almost to himself. The bridge seemed endless. Rain lashed at the car, and every instinct screamed for Daniel to floor the gas and get as far from this man as possible. But he forced himself to keep the speed steady. If the stranger suspected he was afraid, things could spiral fast. Halfway across, the man reached into his jacket pocket. Daniel's heart stopped. The handle glinted in the dim light. But instead of pulling it free, the man withdrew a crumpled photograph. A woman, early 30s, smiling. "Do you think she's pretty?" he asked, his voice almost gentle. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Is she your wife?" The stranger's eyes flickered something between rage and grief. She was, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, the photograph disappeared back into his jacket. The rain kept falling. The bridge ended, but Daniel knew whatever road they were on now there was no turning back. Rain hammered against the windshield as Detective Mark Holloway sped through the empty streets, the wipers barely keeping up. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his mind racing back to the last clue and address scribbled on a torn piece of paper pulled from the inside pocket of the victim's coat. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, as if the person knew they had seconds left to live. He turned sharply onto an unlit road, the tires skidding for a split second before gripping again. The building ahead was old and abandoned, its windows boarded, the faint glow of a flickering light seeping through a crack in the door. Mark killed the engine and stepped out, the rain soaking through his jacket instantly. He approached slowly, gun in hand, his senses heightened. The air smelled of damp wood and something metallic dashed blood inside. The light came from a single lamp on the floor, illuminating a small circle in an otherwise pitch-black room. In the center sat a chair, its legs bound to the floor with chains. And in that chair, a man, alive, gagged, eyes wide in terror. Mark rushed forward, checking for injuries, but the man shook his head frantically, trying to say something. That's when Mark noticed, it taped to the man's chest was a small digital timer, counting down from 342, 341. Mark's stomach dropped. A bomb. The man's muffled cries grew frantic, his eyes darting toward the far corner of the room. Mark followed his gaze and froze. A shadow moved. Someone was here, watching. Before Mark could react, the figure stepped into the light. It was the same hooded man from the CCTV footage earlier in the investigation. He tilted his head, as if studying Mark, then smiled faintly. "You're too late, detective." His voice was calm, almost amused. "But don't worry. You'll see her again soon. Her." The word hit Mark like a punch. He lunged forward, but the hooded man slipped back into the darkness, vanishing as if the shadows had swallowed him whole. To 15. To 14. Mark's hands worked quickly, pulling out his knife to cut through the bomb's straps. His heart pounded, the ticking in his ears growing louder. Sweat and rain mixed on his face as he tried to remember his bomb training. Cut the right wire and they both walk out alive. Cut the wrong one and 105, 104. The man in the chair's eyes were pleading now, and Mark felt every second slipping away. And then a faint click echoed through the room. The timer stopped. 0:59. Mark's breath caught. What the hell? The lamp flickered, then went out. Completely, plunging them into darkness. Somewhere in that blackness, a door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps faded into the storm outside. The hooded man was gone, and Mark knew, deep down, that this was far from over. The air in Brooksville seemed heavier in the days following Daniel's disappearance. Every conversation at the local cafe, every whispered exchange at the market, revolved around one question. Where was he? The police search had expanded, with neighboring towns putting out alerts, but nothing solid came in. Theories flew like vultures. Some swore he'd skipped town to escape debts. Others whispered about a crime of passion. But the people closest to him knew Daniel wasn't the kind to vanish without a trace. Detective Marlowe sat in her office, reviewing the stack of interviews she'd collected. Most led nowhere, but one stood out. It was from a gas station attendant. On the edge of town, he'd sworn he saw Daniel 2 days after the official timeline suggested he'd gone missing. The man described Daniel's anxious look, the way he fumbled with his wallet, and how he kept glancing toward a dark SUV parked across the street. That SUV hadn't been identified yet. Marlowe decided to pull the surveillance tapes from the gas station. Hours of grainy footage blurred together until there he was. Daniel, in a grey hoodie, talking hurriedly on his phone. His eyes darted constantly, like he was being watched. Then, a figure emerged from the SUV. The angle caught only part of them, tall, wearing a dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low. The figure walked toward Daniel, and the camera skipped one of those cursed recording glitches before cutting to an empty frame. Daniel was gone. The footage was enough to convince Marlowe that Daniel hadn't simply walked away from his life. He'd been taken, but by who and why? She began cross-referencing every vehicle matching that SUV's description within 50 miles. That's when another lead appeared. A traffic cam had caught a similar SUV speeding away from a rural road. Just hours after Daniel's last confirmed sighting, Marlowe drove out to that road herself. It was a lonely stretch, lined with skeletal trees and flanked by fields that looked abandoned for decades. A rusted gate marked the entrance to a long-forgotten farm. She stepped through, the wind rattling the metal hinges like a warning. Her boots crunched over brittle grass as she approached the dilapidated barn at the far end of the property. Something about it felt wrong. Inside, dust swirled in narrow beams of sunlight breaking through the roof. In the center of the floor, faint tire tracks etched into the dirt-fresh ones. She followed them to a section of the barn wall where the boards didn't match. With some effort, she pried them open to reveal a narrow passage into a hidden room. The smell hit her first musty, metallic, and faintly chemical. Inside was a makeshift living space, a cot, empty food containers, and a burner phone left on a wooden crate. On the wall, pinned with precision, were photographs, dozens of them. All of Daniel. Some were candid shots of him walking down the street. Others were taken from further away, as though through a long lens. And in the corner, a picture of Detective Marlowe herself, taken from inside her own driveway. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Whoever had taken him was watching her too, and they were closer than she'd realized. Marlowe backed out of the barn, phone in hand, ready to call for backup. But as she reached her car, she froze. There, on her windshield, was a folded note secured under the wiper. She opened it with shaking hands. It read, "Stop looking, or you'll be next." She scanned the empty fields around her, but the silence pressed in. The hunter had just warned the only person willing to chase them, and she wasn't sure if that was a threat or a promise. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the dim yellow streetlights. Detective Ryan Hale stood outside the station, cigarette in hand, his mind replaying every conversation, every lie, every nervous glance from the last few days. The pieces were there, scattered, jagged, but something was still missing. Inside, the evidence board looked like a battlefield of faces and red string. And in the center, the photograph of Evelyn Brooks, eyes frozen in that haunting half smile. Beneath it, the timeline of her last 72 hours stretched across the board like a noose. Ryan's phone buzzed. An unlisted number, he answered. A distorted voice whispered, "You're looking in the wrong place." Before Ryan could respond, the call cut out. He redialed, no signal. He stared at the phone, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. Whoever that was, they weren't warning him. They were taunting him. Minutes later, Ryan was behind the wheel, engine growling as he tore through the quiet streets, toward the address scratched into his memory, an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of town, the same location Evelyn had once mentioned in passing to a friend, a detail almost lost in the noise of conflicting testimonies. The building was a skeleton, rusted beams, shattered windows, and a smell of wet decay. He entered slowly, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every step echoed. Then he saw it, a trail of muddy footprints leading toward the far corner. At the end of it, a metal chair, chains dangling from the arms, and on the floor, a single Polaroid of Evelyn, dated the day before she disappeared. Ryan's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a murder scene, this was a hunting ground. Suddenly, a noise behind him, a faint scrape of metal. He spun, flashlight beams slicing through the shadows, and for a split second, he saw a figure vanish up the stairs. Ryan sprinted after them, boots pounding on rotting wood. The staircase groaned under his weight. He reached the top floor, empty. But then, the sound of heavy breathing. He turned, light catching the faintest reflection of eyes, watching him from behind a collapsed wall. And then, a voice, low and venomous. "You're too late, detective. She was never yours to save." A crash. The shadow was gone. Ryan stood there, pulse roaring in his ears, knowing one thing, whoever that was. They wanted him to keep chasing, and he would. The interrogation room was cold, lit by a single flickering bulb that cast restless shadows across the walls. Detective Harris sat across from Ryan, his arms folded, his eyes unblinking. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Ryan's hands fidgeted on the table, his eyes darting between the detective's stern face and the battered tape recorder in the center. "Let's go over this again," Harris said slowly, his voice calm but with a dangerous undercurrent. "You claim you last saw Emily on Friday night. but witnesses placed you outside her apartment on Saturday morning. Care to explain? Ryan swallowed hard. They're lying. I wasn't there. I told you I was home, alone. Harris leaned in just enough for Ryan to feel the heat of his breath. That's the thing about being alone, Ryan. No one can prove it but you. The door opened abruptly. An Officer Diaz stepped inside, a thick folder in hand. He tossed it on the table with a heavy thud. Photographs spilled out, grainy shots from a security camera showing Ryan's car driving past Emily Street in the early hours of Saturday. Ryan froze, his lips parting slightly. That's not me. It can't be. Harris didn't blink. Same car, same plates, same dent on the bumper. You really want to push this further? Ryan's voice cracked. Someone's framing me. Harris leaned back in his chair, studying him. Maybe, or maybe you're finally running out of lies. Meanwhile, across town, Emily's best friend Claire was pacing her apartment. She had just gotten off the phone with the police, who told her they had someone in custody but no confession. Her instinct screamed that something bigger was going on, that Ryan wasn't telling the whole story. She remembered the cryptic text Emily had sent her days before she vanished. If anything happens to me, don't believe what they tell you. Claire decided to do something dangerous. She grabbed her coat, her phone, and headed to the one place Emily had sworn never to go back to, the old storage unit on the edge of town. The night was biting cold. Her breath fogged the air as she pulled up outside the rusting metal doors. The sound of crickets replaced by an eerie silence. Inside, the fluorescent light flickered weakly. Dust floated lazily in the stale air. Her flashlight beam swept across stacks of boxes, old furniture, and finally, a locked trunk. The same trunk Emily had once mentioned in passing, saying, "It's better if no one ever opens it." Claire's hands trembled as she picked up a crowbar from the floor. The lock gave way with a sickening snap. She slowly lifted the lid and gasped. Inside, wrapped in a thick tarp, was something heavy. She pulled back the material just enough to see a blood-stained sweater. Emily's sweater. Claire staggered back, her heart pounding in her throat. She fumbled for her phone to call Harris, but before she could dial, she heard footsteps echoing through the storage unit, slow, deliberate footsteps. She turned, her flashlight catching a shadow at the far end of the hallway. Someone was there, watching her, and then the lights went out. The room was spinning with tension. Detective Harris stood in front of the suspect, a man whose confidence had been his shield since day one. But now, for the first time, that shield was cracking. On the table between them lay a small plastic evidence bag. Inside, glinting under the harsh fluorescent light, was a single gold pendant engraved with the initials of the victim. It had been found in the suspect's garage, hidden in an old toolbox beneath a pile of rusted wrenches. "You want to explain this?" Harris's voice was calm, almost too calm. The suspect glanced at the pendant, then back at Harris. "I've never seen it before." But Harris didn't blink. "Funny, your fingerprints are all over it." The silence stretched, filling the room like thick smoke. Harris leaned forward, locking eyes with the man. "This is what puts you in the house that night. This is what ends your little story about being somewhere else." In the observation room, Detective Morales watched every twitch of the suspect's face. She could see at the micro-expressions, the subtle changes that gave away the truth. He wasn't just nervous, he was cornered. The suspect tried to smirk, but it came out as a twitch. "You don't have proof," Harris cut him off, tossing a manila folder onto the table. Photos spilled out, crime scene shots, witness statements, a blurry image from a neighbor's security camera, and then the clincher. A close-up of the suspect's truck parked just down the street from the victim's house. Timestamped at 11:46 p.m. "You still want to talk about no proof?" Harris asked, his tone like ice. The man's lips parted, but no words came. Out it was Morales who finally stepped into the room, sliding the door shut behind her. She placed her phone face down on the table. "We also have an audio recording. Care to hear it?" The suspect's breathing grew faster. His hands, once clasped tightly together, now fidgeted uncontrollably. "Play it," Harris said. A soft click, and then the room filled with the muffled sound of footsteps, a door creaking open, and a woman's terrified voice. "What are you doing here?" The voice that followed was unmistakably it was his. The suspect's head dropped. The battle was over. But Morales and Harris both knew this was just the beginning. The confession would open doors to darker truths that would reveal an even bigger monster lurking behind the scenes. The storm outside had faded into a gentle drizzle, but inside the interrogation room, tension clung to the air like humidity after rain. Detective Harris sat across from Olivia, his eyes scanning her face for even the faintest crack in her composure. She had been brought in for questioning, but both knew that this was more than a friendly chat. On the table between them lay a single photograph, one Harris had kept hidden until now. It showed a grainy still frame from the gas station security camera, time-stamped just hours before the murder. Olivia stood there, her hand gripping the arm of someone who was trying to walk away. That someone was Daniel Hayes. Olivia's eyes darted to the photo, then back to Harris. "That doesn't prove anything," she said flatly. "Maybe not," Harris replied, leaning forward. "But this does." He slid another photo across the table, this one in full color, crystal clear. It showed the same moment, but from a different angle, and in Olivia's hand, glinting in the fluorescent light, was the silver-handled knife the medical examiner had described. The room fell silent. Outside, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Olivia shifted in her seat, her knuckles whitening as she clenched her fists. Harris could see the battle raging behind her eyes, the instinct to lie versus the weight of the truth crushing her. Finally, she exhaled. "You think you know everything," she whispered, "but you don't know why it happened." "Then tell me," Harris urged. Her voice was almost trembling now, but the words were sharp enough to cut glass. "Daniel wasn't the victim you think he was. He deserved it." Harris froze, his pen hovering over the notepad. "Go on," she leaned in, her voice lowering. "He wasn't just a man who made mistakes. He hurt people. People you'll never find because they're not here anymore." Harris felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Are you saying there are more victims?" Olivia smirked, a small, almost satisfied curve of her lips. "Let's just say Daniel wasn't the only monster in this story." Before Harris could respond, the door to the interrogation room swung open. Captain Morris stepped inside, holding a sealed envelope. "Harris," he said gravely, "you need to see this, now." Inside the envelope was a flash drive. Harris plugged it into the laptop, and a series of audio files appeared. The first one began to play, a distorted voice, unmistakably Daniel's. Recorded days before his death. "You think you can run. You think you can hide. I'll find you. And when I do, you'll wish you'd never been born." Harris's eyes flicked to Olivia. She didn't look frightened. She looked vindicated. "This is what you were protecting yourself from?" he asked. She nodded slowly. You can call it self-defense, or you can call it justice. I don't care, but either way, I'm not sorry. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the silence that followed. Harris knew the case had just taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. Olivia wasn't just a suspect, she might also be the key to uncovering something far darker, something that could stretch far beyond Daniel Hayes. But as he stared at her across the table, one thing became clear. Whether she was a hero or a villain, the truth was going to be more dangerous than the crime itself.